rant. Like, I've seen fellows get on there and just immediately start cursing. And I mean, just some of the most horrible filth. And I have a mouth of a trucker, so I recognize what that is, right? And at the same time, and then you see there's like a portrait, and at the bottom says, "To be one, ask one," or some type of square and compasses, or they're wearing their Masonic regalia, and you're like, oh wow. So now everybody at that guy's church sees him as this guy that just immediately comes out and just throws out the filth. I mean, the most I can recommend without instigating is just to remind them, hey brother, this is a public forum, and you might want to consider your kids are watching, your wife's family's watching. Maybe you want to reconsider how you're approaching this. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, you're entitled to your views, but at the same time, you should probably find a more diplomatic way of stating it. As Freemasons, that I would recommend that in general. You don't have to be online. The only problem is online, you're in a room all by yourself in front of your phone, right? Or your computer. And you feel that you're anonymous. Well, your photo's still on there, and then you post that you're a member of this lodge and you work here. How many guys have you found out that they said something really nasty on the internet, and then they got fired? You hear it all the time online. You're entitled to your free speech. What you're not entitled to is keeping your job if you say something really nasty or something really negative about a certain type of people. That's just a consequence of living in society. It's always been that way, but now with social media, it's now amplified. You don't have 10 guys that overheard you say it. You have 2 million that overheard you say it, and then it got reposted. So now everybody knows you're a schmuck, right?
I will say that when prospects approach my lodge, I always check their social media.
Oh, I do as well. The first time I can friend them, I do try to find and friend them, kind of check them out, just because they're going to present themselves a certain way when you investigate them or when they come to meet you. When you go to church, you talk with please and thank yous and yes ma'am and frick, right? But then you see them on Facebook and it's MF and this, and this guy's got me all screwed up. I'm editing this out heavily, but you get the idea. I mean, and that is obviously not something that you want to be a representative of the group of people you're with, right? Any other questions, comments? Brother Stephen?
Yeah, I have a question. In your travels, as it would be, have you come across a pro-Masonic site that you can share with us that you like its construct and the intent and the material that they're providing?
So that chat group that I was talking about, they also have it's a Zoom chat, but they have a messenger as well. It's 24/7. They're all around the world. So if you don't mute it, some dude in Australia is going to tell you all about his day, right? But on that same group, they also have a Facebook group, and they want to make sure that you're a regular Mason, and they'll ask you some questions. And most of the time, theoretically, you could get away with sneaking in, but they get rid of most of the conspiracy nuts and all that. And a lot of that, they post on those lectures. I mean, some of the lectures and YouTube channels that I've found, I've seen through a lot of these groups. A lot of it, if you're on Facebook and you have a couple of brothers in this room, a lot of those groups are already suggested. If you put out a notice like, hey guys, is there anything that that you would recommend, you'd be surprised at just how many group links are sent to you. Or you'll get a straight invite. You don't even have to go through all the questioning because you're vouching for them. So I can put anybody here in touch with some of the stuff that as far as research and talk to, I got quite a few of them now. And some of the brothers in here are on them as well. So
thank you. Really enjoyed your talk.
Appreciate it. Anybody else?
Yes, brother.
Sir.
I appreciate you taking a position of responsibility and admonishing folks to be responsible in what it is they post. To your point that once anyone becomes a member of the group, they now become a representative of it. position of authority or responsibility within that group, they have an even greater obligation. And I think you recognize, and hopefully we all recognize, that once something is said, when something is posted, you no longer control it.
Sometimes it's saved forever on some other database. You can't even delete it.
Exactly. And psychologically, you may have occupied 15 different areas of responsibility or posts or memberships in organizations and so forth. And as much as you may want to, this is an opinion, much as you might want to separate your individual responsibility or ability and right to say something, people cannot differentiate between you, the Mason, you, the man, you, the person in the position of authority, and so forth. They're viewing it through all of the individual different lenses. And I had a very, I will say, animated conversation with a person who used to be a Grand Lodge officer, who took several strong political stances. And I tried to admonish him to say, brother, and this was privately, brother, they cannot differentiate between you, the man, you, the former Grand Lodge officer, you, the person in the position of responsibility. So it is a grave responsibility, and I appreciate very much the work that went into this, and you're pointing out our responsibility when we use social media.
Well, I appreciate that. I also do have to acknowledge, being on a lot of these groups, because you end up going down a rabbit hole, right? There are certain brothers that will not, that grand officers or grand body officers that do not join certain groups or do not acknowledge that because they understand that, right? There's some brothers in here also. That said, I've also seen former grandmasters and former members, or just it's still current members, spouting off about everything, and they just don't acknowledge that there is that differentiation, because they go from this is what I think back down to, hey, we had a great meal and car wash down at the lodge, and it's in the same post. And when the first thing I do when I see any type of Masonic representative, I will say, I look at their page. Now, there's a lot of people that get on there and they want to fight, right? So they go through and they scroll through this person's page to look for bad gas on them, right? I don't do that. In fact, I think it's really nasty. On my page, for anybody that's on Facebook, my name's Michael Aaron, E-R-I-N Moore. Now, the first thing that a lot of these people do, see that and go, oh, well, who in your relationship cheated? Because clearly you have a joint account. So I have my lovely lady there with me. My middle name's Aaron. It just happens to be what my parents chose because it translates to of Ireland.
They don't recognize that you might be Irish just a little bit.
Yeah, weird with the kilts and stuff, right? But on the flip side to that, I do go through other people's Facebooks after I see them make a comment, because the first thing I'm doing is I'm scrolling to find that whether they have Masonic pictures, right? And then I'm trying to get a look at their badges and their stuff they comment on to see if they're regular recognized Masons before anything else, because I'm not going to have that conversation with somebody that clearly is a nutter, right? And then, just like online presence, I didn't bring this up, but it just came to me. When it comes to Masons on Facebook, I verify that every one of you that's on my Facebook that I know is a Mason, that you are a regular recognized Mason. Even if I respect somebody else's opinion and what they talk about online and their philosophy, I only put on regular Masons. And the reason for that specifically is if anybody has that mutual friend, if they know what my litmus test is for it, they know that that guy's probably an actual Mason. The only exception to that would be family, friends, and potential candidates. I will invite them to my page, because sometimes you get on, you're answering questions, and they look at the crazy, and they look and they go, hey, this guy seems like he's actually, it's the most boring answer, which is, for Freemasonry, is mostly the true one, right? And then they get on there and they're like, hey, do you have any more information? And I do my best to try to direct them where they need to go, because most of the time I'm not in their jurisdiction by any stretch. There's a guy that I met online. He's actually close by to me. That said, turned out, I'm not going to go too far into it. I wouldn't recommend him, but I did recommend him to the local lodge to where I live, not my lodge, because he just happened to be closer. And then over time, as things come up,
You sent him there to inquire, not recommend.
well, yeah, no,
Let's use the right word.
yeah,
I was privy to a bit of the conversation, so
well, yeah, and I made my recommendations to him, and I tried to answer his questions. And when he was talking about possibly joining the lodge, I said, well, you could possibly put a petition in at my lodge. It's a distance from you. What I recommend is, unless you have a reason to go to that lodge, like your family's in that lodge, or you know you're going to be moving there, you're not going to want to travel 45 minutes out of your way to attend a lodge after you get off work, especially for some of us that, come home absolutely filthy, right? So I was like, hey, why don't you go look into this lodge? You can come to one of our dinners. I can have a discussion. I took him around our lodge room, kind of gave him the simple tour, try to answer any questions. And then as time went on, I said, hey, you guys, this guy, he's a possible candidate. You might want to talk to him. And they took it over from there. And then over time, I kind of ignored his Facebook page, which was negative on my part, because he always posted music video, or he, played music. That's not my thing. I'm not on Facebook to look at what your hobby is for the most part. Not to be rude. But at the same time, I ignored a lot of it. And then finally, he's sending me messages, and they're pretty nasty. I look on his Facebook page, and he's going off on actual rants. And then I go to, try to control what he sees on my Facebook, and I find out he's got 5 pages. And they're not like old pages where he just kind of moved to another page. He actively posts on all 5 of these. So if you put all 5 of these together, you see that this guy is absolutely bonkers, in my opinion. That said, and so I immediately conveyed it to the said lodge, like, hey, did you guys vote on this guy? It's none of my business. I can't participate in your lodge business. But if you haven't, or if you have, I really want you guys to know about this. And it wasn't so much a surprise, other than how extreme he got towards me. So that's the guy we don't want, right? You don't want the crazy one that's going to lose his mind at some point. Conspiracy theories. I was on an investigation once 10, 15 years ago where the guy absolutely is like, I'm with you guys. Where do you guys keep the Ark of the Covenant? And I laughed because I find that humorous. I thought he was joshing me, right? No, he was serious, and I'm sorry to inform you, Dan Brown isn't a fact writer, he's a fiction writer, and all these other, they're fanciful things. Sometimes I want to know, I want to feel like I belong to the Knights Templar and that, history. There's no proof of it. We don't know that for a fact. It might be a connection, might not be. Most likely not. We don't have proof of it. But some people believe that fictional fantasy. They want to believe it. I do too sometimes, right? Fancy swords, nobility. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, I hear all the time that we rule the world. And I tell them, well, if we did, the world would probably be a much better place.
I wouldn't be a truck driver.
I actually kind of disagree. I suspect it would be worse because we can't even figure out what we're having for lunch now. How can we go ahead and actually make a decision on a worldwide basis?
Hey, but if we did rule the world, I'd probably be driving a Bugatti, not a 17-year-old pickup.
That's an aesthetic, though.
So the online presence, I went to a Grand Lodge training a few years back, just that if you have an online presence with the 20, 30-year-olds, if there's nothing on it, it looks like your organization is dead.
Oh, yeah.
So make sure that there's something on there that it's kept up and somebody's doing something with it. And likewise, also make sure in all of the bodies that I'm a member of, we've ended up writing in a social media clause into our bylaws. You've got to be, that's your public face, you've got to be able to control it. There's a Facebook page for my, the lodge that I'm master of. I can't control it because it was put in place by a past master who's passed away. Facebook won't give us control over it. They won't kill it, they won't give us control over it. So if some loon posts a bunch of crap on it, I can't take it off. So just be really careful when you're doing that. You gotta have contingencies for
Forward-thinking
securing
plans.
your identity. And we couldn't get that passworthy brother to put another person on the account. He was master at the time, and he passed away, so now we've lost that opportunity.
Well, yeah, and the other part to that is, so U.S. and state and city laws have changed over time. Most of them haven't caught up to technology, right? Masonic law is the same way. In fact, I would almost argue that it's even more arcane as far as not keeping up with that. There are certain clauses that you could alter to match that, but you really do have to have that forward thinking, because your Facebook today might be something completely different tomorrow. It might be a VR headset. We might be, at some point, it's entirely possible to have a virtual lodge meeting. I don't know how they're ever going to tile it or guarantee anything, but you never know. Did they know that you were going to be able to take photos and have the sum of human knowledge and ignorance all at your fingertips? Yes, anything that a human has thought of and written down, I can access it some way. Every stupid opinion that I've ever made, that you've ever made, that somebody else, some wacky opinion, is just as available. You're sifting through the trash to try to find gems, right? Brother.
I would still wager that future you're referencing is pretty far off. I still know of guys who complain that we use lights instead of candles. So that would be a reasonable jump for some.
Oh yeah, no, and that's true. And part of that is either educating our older brothers or the technologically uninclined brothers, but also to appropriately weed out the guys that they're obviously not a good fit. Just because you're a good fit when you shake somebody's hand doesn't mean you're a good fit when you're selling cars or spouting off about your opinion. And don't get me wrong, everybody's opinion's their own, and that's fine. But there are consequences to your freedom of speech. Not legally, but for the people that want to have you as a friend or family. I mean, we've all heard I'm not going to Thanksgiving with that guy again. He really said some things. Well, how's it to sit down, if you're a brother of a different faith, at a meal and lodge, and meanwhile, this guy just spouted off about your people and you have different diet habits. Meanwhile, what are they serving? Ham. And you just, as far as your faith, you can't have it, right? And now you feel like you've been ostracized, and it's not even intentional. That guy still shakes your hand. He still asks you how your kids are, right?
And I'm sorry to.
No problem.
No, go for it. I'm the junior warden of 503, have been for the past 2 years. And that, I believe, should be one of our biggest goals when we identify new members coming in, is to assess religious and dietary habits and pass that along, so whoever's in charge of said refreshments is able to accurately alter the plan. We have a gentleman who, not due to religious preference, doesn't eat pork. And after learning that, I haven't once made pork dishes just so he wouldn't feel singled out.
Yeah.
Or is that an option?
Yeah.
Well, and the other part to that, and that, yes, that's true. And I try to avoid narrowing down what a person's background is when I do the interview or go through the investigation. But at the same time, I try to do this as polite as I possibly can. Would you have an issue if it was the Holy Bible on our altar? I don't mean to ask what denomination you are, but if your faith is of Islam, why wouldn't I have a Quran on the altar for you, and that sort of thing? That plays into knowing that he eats halal, prepared food, and that can make a big difference to whether he even wants his family to know whether he shows up or invite them to something. He may be fine just eating salad or avoiding that, but does he want to bring his family to that? We're a family organization, if not of just a fraternity. You don't necessarily want to single anybody out.
Well, one of our,
Wrap it up.
I don't got a big flashing red light like we do on stage, sorry, Mike.
I'll take a final question. No? Yes?
Yep, no.
All right. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.